Lambert to come speak to you because Block Island was a formative experience for me as a young postdoc. I was, this isn't exactly what I want, but
The slides.
all right. So we, at Harvard, Dr. Norman and Dahl and his wife, Dorothy, approached my mentor at Harvard, Andy Spielman, about the Lyme disease problem on Block Island in 1990, the year I got my doctorate. And he flew us over to Block Island to take a look. And subsequently, the Block Island study started with our colleague Peter Krause at the Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and we had ecological surveys done out here, and with Peter started an annual blood draw. And in fact, I was one of the phlebotomists at the very first blood draw. Linda Kloster, the nurse at the BI clinic, it was called at the time, was the other phlebotomist, and we enrolled 800 people during those first 2 years. And so subsequently Peter moved to Yale, my own work took me to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. But nonetheless, there were a whole list of people here on Block Island who may or may not be around anymore. I was delighted to make the reacquaintance of Nancy Greenaway, who was at the Block Island Clinic at the very start of the Block Island study. But there were a number of names, people like the Dahls and the Brassards, Frankie and Gordon Smith, Betty Fitzpatrick, all of them providing logistical support out here, taking us into their homes and allowing us to work out here. Otherwise, it would have been very, very difficult. But nonetheless, the community has always been extremely supportive of research, and a number of very important studies in tick-borne disease epidemiology came out of that. The very first evidence that so-called co-infections, Lyme disease and babesiosis, that they occur at the same time and cause persistent illness of greater magnitude than either of the infections alone. That work came out of Block Island, and this thing which is the basis for the holy grail for vaccines against tick-borne disease, that is, people who have been exposed repeatedly to ticks develop an itch, and they're much less likely to report having been sick with Lyme disease or babesiosis. And that stimulated efforts to an anti-tick vaccine, which have yet to be realized, but nonetheless would be the best thing because it would protect against all tick-borne disease. And not only that, Block Island was one of 3 sites that we had. I ran the phase 2 clinical trial for SmithKline Beecham's Lyme disease vaccine. Block Island, Peter Brassard was the investigator here, was one of the sites that we used to provide evidence to the FDA that the vaccine was safe and also effective, and subsequently was led to be approved by FDA. Sadly, it was only deployed for about 5 years and was withdrawn from the market because of activism, but also because the company was not making enough money. That at the time, Lyme disease was geographically restricted, and the population for the vaccine was much more restricted as well. So I moved to Tufts in 2002. Andy passed away in 2006. Peter moved to Yale in 2008 and worked with a very, very fine tick ecologist, Maria Dukwasser. And Maria moved to Columbia and had a postdoc, Danielle Tufts, who was the latest person to work on the ecology of ticks out here. And Danielle made some really interesting observations that we'll talk about in a bit. And now Danielle moved to UPenn as a young faculty member, and Maria is working on Staten Island, which has, believe it or not, a worse problem than you do here. And so I'm so happy to be back on Block Island. It's been at least 20 years since I stepped foot on it. So I'm not going to spend time on this. You know that there are problems associated with ticks. Lyme disease, babesiosis. These are just deer tick transmitted infections. Lyme disease, babesiosis, anaplasma, Borrelia miyamotoi, and powassan encephalitis. And the Lone Star tick, which is invaded, has its own set of pathogens and conditions that are associated with it. Danielle found that on Block Island, a tick that is only found in Europe was found here, Haemophilus punctata, and also found the Asian longhorn tick, Haemophilus longicornis, during her work in the late 2018, 2019 or so. And these all complicate reports of, oh, it was a terribly ticky year in Site X. The Asian longhorn tick was somehow introduced in the United States in the early 2010s and rapidly spread to 17 states within 5 years because the female can self-fertilize. A single female tick is sufficient to start a population, and they spread like wildfire because they too use deer as what we call the reproductive host. That is where they get blood in order to lay eggs. And it is now the most common tick on Nantucket. I found it 3 years ago, and it's already taken over the eastern end of the island. And interestingly, so I came here a little early today. I wanted to go out and see whether things had changed, whether I could get some sort of handle on how many deer were out there, and whether the Lone Star tick, which Danielle had found back in 2015, 2017, whether they had expanded to the point that they were a nuisance. And so I'll pass these around. This is what I collected from five sites on island. Don't worry, they're not going anywhere. And I will take them with me, so I'm not going to turn them backwards. But nonetheless, these I was hoping to see whether the Lone Star ticks have indeed become a tremendous problem here, because at this time of year, the youngest stage, the larva, emerges from piles of 3,000 eggs that each fed female, and again, the female tick feeds on deer in order to lay eggs, will sit there on a piece of vegetation, and you can literally get hundreds on your leg if you're passing through. And so I was getting hundreds and hundreds of larvae, as you'll see, from 4 out of the 5 sites that I sampled, yet these are not Lone Star tick larvae. These are Asian longhorn tick larvae. I reserve final judgment until I put them under a microscope, but I tried to get them to feed on me, and they wouldn't. And the Lone Star tick would very aggressively do so. The Asian longhorn tick doesn't really like people and doesn't bite. They are pests for dogs, though. But we're fortunate that they don't bite people. So there are these invasive ticks: the Lone Star tick, the Asian longhorn tick, this Haemophilus punctata, the European equivalent of the longhorn tick. And what I worry about is that Lone Star ticks will become, as they have on Martha's Vineyard, the greatest nuisance you could ever imagine. If you have friends on the North Fork of Long Island, just talk to them about whether they actually go outside anymore, because the deer population is such that Lone Star ticks are all over the place, and they are miserable, not only because they cause a tremendous itch when they bite, but also because they're associated with alpha-gal disease or the red meat allergy. It's an allergic condition. We don't fully understand what it is about tick bites, Lone Star tick bites in particular, that induces this allergy. Not everyone's susceptible. It's sort of like having shellfish or peanut allergy. How many people do you know get that? Do you yourself fear getting shellfish allergy if you're eating seafood from the restaurant here? No. So it's not every single Lone Star tick bite that will cause this, but nonetheless, on Martha's Vineyard, where these ticks were not present 10 years ago, they're now such a problem that alpha-gal allergy is the second most commonly diagnosed tick-borne disease there. And some of you may have seen a New York Times report a few months ago about how restaurants are now converting to vegan menus because people cannot tolerate red meat anymore. That is your future if you do not act now. You have the good news with what I'm passing around is that those are not Lone Star ticks. You have time. But mark my words, and I will lay down $1,000 of my own money as a bet. 5 years from now, if you do not act now, you will have the same problem Martha's Vineyard has. And it's all because of deer. So most people, I hope, know that ticks come in 4 flavors. They have eggs, larvae, nymphs, and adults. They all have characteristic seasons of activity. And so the ticks that you were seeing in May, June, and July, they were the nymphal forms, not just the deer tick, but the Lone Star tick and the Asian longhorn tick. And so when you say there were a lot of ticks around in May, June, and July, we don't know whether it was deer ticks, we don't know whether it was Lone Star ticks, we don't know whether they were Asian longhorn ticks. And Asian longhorn ticks and Lone Star tick nymphs look very similar. The only thing that we would be able to tease that information out with is how many cases of Lyme disease did you see this year, and did it differ from previous years? So we won't go through the life cycle, but all ticks have the same kind of larvae, nymphs, adults, and eggs. The adult tick feeds on an animal. The female takes blood and deposits eggs. And so that is, in my opinion, the stage that you need to attack in order to do something about your tick population. Now, I came out of a school of public health. Most people don't sort of conflate the ideas of short-term and long-term modes of prevention. Short-term modes are things that you have to do every single day forevermore. It's like a monkey on your back. Using repellents, for example, is a short-term intervention. Spraying insecticide is a short-term intervention. You stop your spraying, the arthropods will come right back. So all of these things that people are doing now are short-term interventions, whereas we prefer in public health long-term interventions, things where you intensify your resources and effort for a few years and then have a maintenance phase where it doesn't cost as much anymore and the effect is long-lasting. And the only long-term interventions that we have now for tick-borne, these ticks, is deer reduction. Pasturing would be nice. If you could go down and cut down all of that thick stuff out there and turn it back into pasture, you wouldn't have a problem with ticks. You wouldn't have as many deer either. And then the thing that 60 Minutes was focusing on last Sunday was our effort with MIT in trying to modify mice genetically so that we could release them and they'd replace the mice that you have, and they were no longer able to infect ticks. But that is an approach for 5 to 10 years from now. We're just starting to get that done, and in fact, the regulatory issues are going to be a nightmare. Everybody should know about this tick management handbook. It's online at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station for free. It's like 50, 60 pages. It tells you everything you need to do to manage ticks and your risk of getting tick bites. And so just briefly, what you need to be doing in the interim, while we think of long-term methods and implement those, is the short-term methods of personal protection. The biggest bang for your buck is this, the insect shield socks. I'm wearing them. I was just out in the field. You buy them from Amazon. They're no longer as expensive. You know, they're just as expensive as any other pair of socks. And they work because ticks crawl across them, mosquitoes crawl across them, and they die within 3 hours. And so they will not transmit. In fact, there is a repellent action as well. But if you don't want to go that way, and there's no reason not to, it's a perfectly safe thing to do. Our military uniforms have been treated with permethrin for 30 years now or more, and our people spend 24/7 in them. The compound permethrin is used in head louse shampoo at a concentration 3 times that is what is on your permethrin-treated socks. And you put that on your toddler's head for 30 minutes. So it's a perfectly safe compound. It is your biggest bang for your buck. Everybody should be wearing permethrin-treated socks. Now, yes, they're not the most fashionable thing, and people look like idiots wearing socks when they've got sandals on. So, the clever people can get around this. You can treat your shoes and your smaller socks with permethrin as well. Check yourself for ticks in the shower. Take a shower every day. Check for ticks. Be aware that there are ticks in the environment. If you get sick, go see a healthcare provider. And finally, if you're immunocompromised, if you're on medication for malignancies, if you have HIV, you may want to avoid habitat. Or if you don't avoid habitat, at least wear the permethrin-treated socks. So these are things that you can do. I've managed to avoid getting Lyme disease crawling around under the bushes, getting hundreds of ticks with every field trip. By simply, this was the thing I was doing for a long time when I was younger. I'm now at that age where if I got a tick-borne disease, it would matter. And so I'm actually wearing permethrin-treated socks. But for the longest time, it was like, no way am I having permethrin anywhere near my ticks because it's such death on them. What we really need is integrated tick management. So personal protection is number one, but you can do things to clean things up in the environment. You can clear brush around your homes. You can get rid of leaf litter. These ticks all need places to retain humidity. Dryness is their enemy. And so if you remove leaf litter, if you remove thick vegetation, you will reduce the amount of habitat that they can thrive in. Education and awareness, again, if you know where these things come from, you'll be much more likely to argue with your neighbor about doing things. Spraying is not a dirty word. Most people in this room probably remember Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, and the negative things that came out of the widespread application of DDT in the environment, which was a persistent chemical. The chemicals we use today break down in sunlight within 3 to 4 days. They do not bioaccumulate. You need far less of them because they're way more toxic to the arthropod, not to mammals, than DDT was. And so I tell people, what were our grandfathers driving in the 50s? Studebakers, things like that. Today we're driving Priuses and Teslas. It's the same with mosquito control. Mosquito control and tick control sprays have advanced tremendously. And so that technology can be used safely and should be considered. There are so-called host-targeted parasites, these so-called four-poster devices. The paint rollers have permethrin or fipronil, the stuff you used to paint on the back of your dogs. And the deer would come in to access corn, get rubbed with this stuff, and the ticks would die on them. Works perfectly well. Deer reduction is what I want to talk mostly about because part of my doctoral thesis was analyzing the first experiment where we reduced the deer to see what would happen to the deer ticks. And then finally, we're thinking of things like reservoir-targeted vaccination, but that's not germane here. So, but remember, there's a lot of confusion here. We need to attack either tick production or tick infection. So the genetically modified mice attacks tick infection. Reproduction of the tick production, is attacking the deer, where they get the blood meal to make new ticks. So like the chicken and the egg thing. What's more effective? Obviously, getting rid of the ticks or reducing the ticks is better because then you'll reduce the amount of infection that's out there. Deer feed the most deer ticks. Early studies showed that 94%, this was out on Long Island. This is an egg mass of 2,000. So the deer tick lays 2,000 eggs. The Lone Star tick lays 3,000 eggs. This is a deer ear that's fairly representative. This is a tube of, so these ticks swell up like 200 times their size. So these are like little grapes. Some of you may have seen them, little raisins maybe. I personally picked off 99 fed female ticks from one deer on Crane Reservation in Massachusetts. If you do the numbers, 99 times 2,000 eggs is almost 200,000 larvae. That's 1 week's production because the female tick takes 7 days to feed. And there are 16 weeks during which the adult female tick is active. So if you do the numbers, 3 million larvae potentially could come from one deer each year. So this was the experiment. The Great Island experiment is a little peninsula off of Lewis Bay and Cape Cod. The people there, by 1981, 1982, 16% of the households there, 16% of the people there had gotten Lyme disease. The people of Mainz, they came to Harvard, they said, we want something done. And my boss, Andy Spillman, said, okay, let's reduce the deer and see what happens. And so part of my job from 1985 until, and I continued to study until 1994, was to go out and trap mice every month from April through October and count ticks on mice because they're unbiased. They're out there going places where I can't go. And so you count the ticks and you look at the number of larvae per mouse. And you did this on Nantucket as well. We did it on Nantucket because nothing was done to the deer there. It was status quo. The deer hunt took 500-600 animals each year, and they did it every year, and there's still plenty of deer there. And you could see the red declining after the deer were removed. And this is where numbers like 6 to 8 per square mile is a good target to try to reduce deer ticks. That's where that number comes from. And in fact, in human cases, you can see after 83, 84, when the majority of the deer were removed, you see 3 cases. This is with aggressive case finding. I would sit in front of their chapel every 3rd Sunday in July, and they put their arm out to me, and I'd bleed them. And we looked for cases. We asked them to report cases. So this is why I'm so passionate, why I'm the nation's biggest advocate for killing deer as a way to solve our Lyme disease problem. And sadly, I've been working 40 years, and I've never gotten the community to be able to do it, because it's very, very complicated, as we'll talk about in a minute. Models have been made. There's no way we're going to disrupt the transmission cycle in nature. Mice will always be infected regardless of how many deer there are out there. What we want to do is just reduce the overflow of infected ticks from that needed to keep the infection going in the mice to what we see in the environment. We don't want any extra infected ticks out there, and that's the goal of deer reduction, not to eradicate Lyme disease. It's never going to happen. And there have been a number of experiments out there doing deer reduction. The 4-posters, these devices that feed deer, show that if you deploy them 1 every 6 hectares or so, and keep them out there, the percentage of control that you get, 80% control of the ticks, is phenomenal. But once you stop it, the effect goes away. And so it's one of these short-term approaches, and it has other issues, raccoons and rats and seagulls and crows like the corn too. So there is a trade-off there. Sadly, my colleagues at the CDC published a very negative paper. Their standard for evidence for an effect of an intervention is the randomized control, the placebo-controlled trial. No one's ever done that for deer reduction. So they go through the literature and they look at all of the deer reduction experiments and they say, oh yeah, well, we see a reduction in density of ticks, coincident with the density of deer, but we don't see reduction in human Lyme disease. Well, they admit that there are 3 of these studies that probably show human risk reduction, even though the study was not designed to do it. Well, on Great Island, it wasn't a randomized placebo-controlled trial. It was just me taking blood from people. So I argue that paper really angered me, because activists in the communities would say, CDC says deer reduction doesn't work. Well, it doesn't if you use their standard of what works. But no one's ever going to do that, because to do a randomized placebo-controlled trial of humans costs millions of dollars. We did the Great Island study with $20,000 a year over 5 years. So I wrote this argument against them, and really the objective is, this is what we had on Block Island in the late 60s, early 70s. You had little patches where you would see deer. Over the years, this is what you have now. There's so many deer, they've expanded from those little sites into, the foci coalesce so that they're all over the place. What we want to do with deer reduction is bring it back to that level. It's not to make this completely blue, free of blue, but rather to bring it back to that. And their arguments really were fairly weak. Oh, it works only on islands, regardless of the fact that 2 of the studies were on peninsulas. They were called islands, but they were actually peninsulas. The evidence for risk reduction is weak. Okay, well, we didn't focus on humans. It doesn't immediately reduce risk. That's true. It's a long-term approach. you take baby steps, and over 10 years, maybe you will see a risk reduction. However, if you were lucky enough to get rid of all, the Martians came and just sucked all the deer off of Block Island, you would see effects within 2 years. And so they argue that deer reduction is not feasible. That's not true. It works. The incentives and socio-political issues that surround doing it, some of that is difficult to deal with. So we come to this question of how many deer on Block Island. When we started working here in 1991, that's one of the first things we did was a flyover. The number we came up with, 800 deer. The numbers that we see today, well, there have been 2 flyovers that I could uncover from Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. They come up with things like 387 that they saw by the deer count, and if you add things like, they saw 460 or 630 deer. If you add what the hunters harvested, you're still getting somewhere less than 1,000 deer on Block Island. Maria Duckwasser is a great mathematician. She actually looks at some fudge factors and modeling and suggests that there might be 1,300 deer on Block Island. Nantucket is estimated to have 10,000 deer. I find that hard to believe, and in fact, walking around today, I find it hard to believe that you have anywhere near 1,000 deer too, because walking through these, I see no track, I see no scat, I see very few deer trails. If you had 100 deer per square mile, you would see sign of deer all over the place. So you have the opportunity to keep the population at that level and still risk the problem of Lone Star ticks developing within 5 years to the point that they are a tremendous nuisance, and you have to all become vegan, or many of you will, or you can act now. Some people say, oh, we need to do more flyovers. Well, if the Department of Environmental Management doesn't do it, it's going to cost you 10 to 15 grand to have somebody do it. You can use that money for other things. There are better ways of doing it. You don't really need to know precisely how many deer are out here. You have a problem. Is knowing exactly how many deer really going to change your perception of that problem? No. And we actually don't know whether it's a linear relationship between deer density and human risk, because we still don't really understand how people get Lyme disease or any of the other tick-borne infections. Is it around their yard? Is it walking through trails? Is it because your indoor-outdoor cat brings your ticks in? So there are many things that remain to be defined. And remember that one flyover is a static number, and things change from year to year. And so you may have different density in subsequent years. And so really what I argue is that just start doing something, and the only metric you're interested in is how many fewer complaints you hear about ticks, how many fewer cases of Lyme disease or visits to the medical center about tick bite do you see each year. And so what can Block Island do? And I haven't been here for a long time. I looked at the deer hunting regs and I'm like, oh my God, I'm a deer hunter. I'd love to live in Rhode Island. They have 2 extra months of hunting. You can hunt within 200 feet is the setback for archery from inhabited houses. It's 500 feet in Massachusetts. And then I look and it's zone 1 that has all these great regs. Block Island is a lot more restricted, and so that's really my first recommendation is align your hunting season with Zone 1. The Department of Environmental Management will work with you on that. But remember, you need integrated risk management. You can't just rely on the possibility of reducing the deer substantively enough over time so that 10 years from now, your grandchildren will have a better place to be. So you have to take this approach. This is for your grandchildren. It's too late for you guys. It's too late for your kids. But their kids may benefit from what you do now. So you have to start reducing risk with everything possible until, I call it the rapture, just given recent events. The rapture for me is the Martians coming in, sucking all the deer off of Block Island in Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Not going to happen, but, Permethrin-treated socks is your number one. Go out and buy your neighbors. Buy socks for everybody on Block Island. Vegetation management. What value is that fixed stuff out there? If you look back at pictures of Block Island 50 years ago, it was every bit as beautiful as it used to be, as it is today. You just didn't have that stuff that you can't even walk through. And a lot of that's fire hazard. Greenbrier is a big, hugely flammable. Citizen science, you're short on hands out here. You can't afford to have a tick czar. Martha's Vineyard has made great strides in reducing risk because we were able to find money for a tick czar, someone who made it their job to implement changes out there, to educate people. We do yard surveys out there. We go to people's yards and point out, hey, you have a leaf litter pile next to your swing set. Get rid of it. Things like that would make a big difference and educate people at the same time. You could try deer-targeted treatment. I know baiting is on the table. People are asking for baiting. Four posters are frowned upon by divisions of Fish and Wildlife because they aggregate deer and they're worried about chronic wasting disease. And the fact of the matter is, you're an island. You're not going to get chronic wasting disease. They don't have any grounds for saying that. But they do have the legitimate grounds of the drug treatment has to be withdrawn at least a month before hunting season, not because of any real risk. An old deer biologist from Massachusetts once told me, confidentially, we cannot support having drug residues in our deer because 20 years from now, a citizen will tell their state rep, I got cancer because I ate tainted deer that your Fish and Wildlife allowed the use of chemicals in. That's the kind of rhetoric that's out there. But you can use four posters during the time of maximal abundance of the adult Lone Star tick and the adult Asian longhorn. We're really not terribly interested in them. But April, May, June, that's when the adult Lone Star tick is out there. You could use four posters. And they have no grounds for denying you the use of a four poster during that time of year. It doesn't do anything for deer ticks, but it would certainly help reduce the probability that you will end up like the North Fork of Long Island or Martha's Vineyard, and everybody has to, well, a lot of people have to go vacant. Make deer hunting easier for people. It's all very well and good to say we're going to hire sharpshooters to come out here. We're going to make it easy for them. We're going to get suppressor, silencer laws changed. That's never going to happen. I'm a firearms owner. I'd love to have a suppressor for mine. Never, ever going to happen. But you can make it easier for them. Give them better hunting times. I mean, a lot of people who hunt deer are working people. They can't take time off from their jobs. They need to hunt on weekends. Access to properties. There's a lot of private land here. Get volunteers together, knock on people's doors, get them to sign papers that say hunters are allowed on my land. Get the police chief to, that is kind of an odd requirement, having the chief have to countersign those permission forms, but it is local politics. The best thing you could do with the $10,000, $15,000 that you save from a flyover, buy a refrigerated trailer. That way, hunters have no pressure in trying to process their deer when they take them. They can donate the deer. Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket both have refrigerated trailers. That way, hunters can take an extra deer, leave it there, and the word goes out to the community, hey, come get a deer if you're hungry. Have you seen the price of beef? How are poor people going to afford red meat? So this is a great way to use deer, and in fact, that is the biggest problem with using hunters to reduce deer herds. A responsible hunter is not going to take more than 2 deer. They can't use more than 2 deer. So they need an outlet for venison. How do you do that? Well, you can't sell venison, but you can process it, you can cook it, and you can sell that. You can make sausage, you can make turkey. There's a business to be had here, people. There's got to be some unemployed people out here who are looking for a business to make money. Can you imagine Block Island chorizo, Block Island kielbasa. You know, use your head. You can develop an outlet for venison. It'd be a good, again, there must be unemployed kids out here after college educations. They're unemployed. Send them to be trained as meat cutters. That is a big bottleneck in processing deer is a big bottleneck. There are very few places that will do this. And as someone who's growing older, it's a pain to have to process your own deer. So being able to do that, I know the $150 tail thing is supposed to defray those costs. Where are they going to go? They're going to take them off island and then wait in line for have their deer processed. And it costs them money to take them on the ferry. Maybe negotiate with the ferry for reduced rates for taking deer off. But pay for someone to do this, to learn out this trade and have them set things up. Here on Block Island, I understand there's someone who raises beef here on island, has to ship them off island to be butchered. Work in partnership with someone like that. And finally, there's a big pushback by hunters to reduce deer herd because they're lazy. I'm lazy. I would love it if I didn't, I could just walk out in the woods and get my deer in 20 minutes and go back to work. I'm a meat hunter. I don't care about what the deer looks like. I just want to fill my freezer. Same with a lot of people. But deer hunting is tough. And you see the vegetation out there. It's even tougher for people out here. Make it easy for them and then realize that as the deer population goes down, they're going to have to work harder. You need to reimburse them for ways to compensate them for the work that they're going to put into trying to keep the deer herd at a low level. Remember, at a low level, we're not trying to eradicate deer, we're just trying to compress their home ranges down into smaller and smaller sites. And so there are many things that you can be doing, and I'll end there because we want to ask questions. I want to answer questions. I hope you have questions. But I could speak all day about this given my 40 years of banging my head against the wall in communities like Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and maybe now Block Island as well. Some of the things that I've heard here really would make me pop out my head again. So with that, I'll open it to questions. Yes.
There's no mic, so I'll have to come do this so maybe you can hear me.
Yeah.
We got a mic.
Oh, great.
He's recording you, Eva.
Thank you. I'm a little confused about what you're saying with regard to vegetation. I certainly understand the overgrowth that's all green out there, when that heavy shrubs needing to be reduced. But what about, I live in an area where most of the fields are mowed once a year, and it never gets higher than knee high, and it's an arrangement of bayberry, sumac, and just regular grass and goldenweed. So is that equally harmful as far as one's ability to get infected from the ticks?
That's where citizen science can help you. Take a bunch of people out and walk through one of those fields versus walking through Rodman's Hollow, and you'll see how many fewer ticks you get. But if you mow twice a year, it would be better for reducing tick populations. They need places where they can hide from desiccation. And so open fields are not a great place for ticks. Not only that, it's not a great place for mice. There's a good place for meadow voles or field mice, which are not the main hosts for the deer tick, certainly not for the Lone Star tick or the Asian longhorn tick. Neither of those feed on rodents at all. So you're reducing habitat for mice, which are infecting. They are the main source here on Block Island for Lyme disease and the other deer tick transmitted pathogens. And so if you mow twice a year, that will certainly keep the tick population down. I've worked on Martha's Vineyard with dog ticks and the threat of tularemia out there, rabbit fever. And the fields that are mowed twice a year, there are no dog ticks anywhere, even though the reproductive hosts, skunks and raccoons, are all over the place. And so that could help a lot, is better vegetation management.
So just to clarify, and then I'll deal with somebody else. the area that I'm referring to, I don't own that land and have no ability to control the mowing regimen, so it's really, it can only be done once a year.
Yeah.
And, but are you saying that knee-high grassland puts one equally at risk for getting infected?
You have good risk of picking up a Lone Star tick. They seem to be not as restricted to shrubby vegetation. Nonetheless, if that grassland were kept short, they too would disappear.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Some people have thought about bringing sheep are a good thing. You bring sheep or goats, they'll keep it mowed, and the nice thing about sheep or goats, the ticks like to infest them. But unlike here, you can bring them into the barn and feed a medication to them that will kill the ticks. You can burn them. There are lots of things you can give goats and sheep that will kill ticks. The same thing is with your dog. There are things that you feed your dog, you can feed those to the sheep and goats. Yes.
You were referencing the vaccine that had been in development. I mean, it seems like this is a huge public health issue, or has become a much bigger public health issue. Is there any prospect of that being kind of...
Yeah, the old vaccine is gone. Up until 5 or 6 years ago, I actually considered trying to bring back the old one because I have the recipe. I was going to put it out on YouTube or something and say, any high school lab with recombinant DNA capability can make this vaccine. But now Pfizer has an advanced candidate. It's just completed its phase 3 clinical trials, and I am confident that in 2027 you will be able to buy a Lyme disease vaccine. That will help a lot, but it will do nothing for babesiosis, anaplasmosis, Borrelia motoi, Boston encephalitis, or any of the Lone Star tick transmitted infections like ehrlichiosis or rickettsiosis. And so, and in fact, I worry, and we worried with this Lyme trials, we kind of saw this. People would say, oh, I've been vaccinated. I don't have to worry about ticks anymore. And we started seeing more babesiosis on Nantucket. So yes, it will be a great help to have something that works against Lyme disease. But it's not going to solve your problems. It's definitely not going to help you with Lone Star ticks. And believe me, you don't want them. Go to Long Island tomorrow. Try to walk through some of the land there, and you will be very, very sorry.
I want to pause just for a second
Joe.
here. We've got another question, but we promised refreshments, so we're passing pizza around. So I want to keep this going. We have I'm sure some other questions, great points, but feel free to kind of partake. We're going to kind of serve you at least with a few boxes. This is pizza from Sadie Flaterman's Virginica Pizza. So some of you may have tried it this summer, but we're delighted to be able to offer that. Having said that, I'm going to move to our next question. Right here.
Thank you. My initial question is really more about the mice, the whole mouse situation. I'm not clear. So the mice are also being infected with Lyme disease and babesiosis, but they're not the carriers? I mean, that's...
No, they are. But they're the ones that infect the ticks. The ticks themselves are born uninfected. So if it wasn't for infected mice, you would have just pest ticks.
So who's infecting the mice?
The mice are infected by the previous generation of deer ticks. So that's why the life cycles are so important to understand. Right now, you have the tail end of the larval or baby deer tick season. They are feeding on mice that were infected earlier in the summer by the nymphal ticks. So it's the nymphal ticks that are infected. They were infected back last year at this time. So the tick has a 2-year life cycle.
So, I mean, wouldn't getting rid of a lot of mice also help? I mean, is it just deer, or what about the mice?
As I tried to point out, there are two processes. You can attack the infection source,
Right.
But it's probably more economical and better for the environment to attack the source of the blood that makes ticks.
Okay.
See, if you attack mice, you can go out and try to kill mice, but then the raptors, the snakes, all of those animals that depend upon mice would suffer. So you don't want to do that.
One other thing you just mentioned, I was curious about. So, if we feed our dogs NexGard, right, and the ticks die out of them, and you said sheep and goats can also have medication like that. Number one, horses. I mean, we have a lot of horses that get tick-borne disease, and humans. Can we eat NexGard and kill ticks? I'm sort of joking and not really.
No, you're not joking. There is a study that has been submitted for publication that I was part of, where we're taking one of the dog compounds and we fed it to people. They tolerated it. It's a once-a-month thing, and the ticks that fed on them died. So that's forthcoming. So there are developments coming, but nonetheless, like the dog preventives, the tick still has to feed on you in order to get enough compound in to poison the tick. So you don't want any ticks attaching and feeding to you, but it's good insurance for those people who may not be able to find a tick in time. You have 24 hours or so before a Lyme-infected tick can transmit. So if the tick dies in 3 or 4 hours, then that's a great thing, regardless of the fact that it was actually attached to you. Now, there are other infections that don't take as long to transmit. So, but it's yet another tool in our risk management toolbox. Promethin-treated socks, these pills, repellents, all of these work together. There is no one thing you can rely on, although I would argue promethin-treated socks are pretty darn close to it.
And horses, can they get, is there anything in
You
that?
have to talk to your veterinarian
Yeah.
about that.
I've never heard
They have very peculiar guts.
Yeah.
Sam, I
Thank you.
want to stay with the mice issue for a moment because I've had several conversations where, because we were working on deer reduction, various people would say, "Well, you're barking up the wrong tree. We really have too many mice and rats on the island. We should really be focusing on that. We should not be wasting our time on deer." So
I hear the same thing from my colleagues. Shame on them, because it shows they don't understand the tick life cycle and this idea of source of the ticks and source of infection. Mice are the source of infection, deer are the source of ticks. What do you attack? Preferably both, so you can use these tick tubes, right? They're cotton balls treated with permethrin. You put them out around the perimeter of your yard. The mice take the cotton, take it back to their nest. It rubs off on their fur, and they get cleared of ticks and fleas and things like that. So that's been around for a long time. They're expensive. You have to apply them as directed by the manufacturer. So it's going to cost you probably $300 in the spring and $300 in the fall for a typical 1 to 2 acre property. But that technology has been out for a long time. There is nothing that would violate the patent and bring the lawyers on you if you made your own tubes. And when we started working out here in 1990, 1991, I was the one who was recommending to the community that they do that. My boss, Andy Spielman, was a major shareholder in the company that made those tubes, and he was horrified.
any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Sam, for, we got another one over here. Where are we? Okay.
I'm very loud, I don't need the microphone.
This is true, Daddy.
What
I've
can you,
been married to her for 65 years. That's the first truthful thing she's ever said.
what can you tell us about the seed tick?
The seed tick is what I was passing around. They look like little seeds. So down south, the larval Lone Star tick is called a seed tick. Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you get bites by a dozen of them, they are horrible. Anybody who's been down south knows that them and chiggers, seed ticks and chiggers are the bane of one's existence down south. Yeah, but you're right. We could call them seed ticks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for coming. I had a question about the vaccine that might be coming out. If you have had Lyme disease since, I think the first time was in 93, 92, 93, out here. So having had it, would I be able to get the vaccine, and what would that do for me?
There's no contraindication for the vaccine for people who have had Lyme disease. There is no natural immunity to Lyme disease. You can get Lyme disease over and over again because the bacteria is very clever. However, we were more clever. In fact, if I'm known for anything as a young scientist, it's for working out the mechanism of action of the Lyme disease vaccine. It's unusual in that, unlike other vaccines, like let's look at measles. So you're given dead measles virus as a kid. Your body remembers that. And when you see real measles virus, live measles virus, your body says, I've seen this, I'm going to fight it. So it's called a memory response or anamnestic response. And then the immune system kicks in, generates antibodies and T cells and things like that that kill the invading organism. So with the Lyme disease vaccine, it's very different. The Lyme disease vaccine induces antibodies, just like your immune system would. Your immune system generates antibodies based upon one protein on the Lyme disease bacterium that is only found in the stages in the tick. So there is a complex life cycle of the bacterium in the tick. It's a receptor for tissues in the gut of the tick. And so generating antibodies against this is not something the bacteria has ever encountered. We were more clever. The antibody that you have circulating as a result of vaccination comes in as the tick is feeding and kills the bacteria in the gut of the tick before they've had a chance to switch. What they do is they switch their coat from this outer surface protein A, which is what the vaccine is, to something called outer surface protein C, which is what's required to initiate infection in a mammal. But if they haven't had a chance to change it yet, that's why the 24 hours is required. That's when they're changing their protein code. The antibody comes in as the tick is feeding, kills them before they've had a chance to change their code. So it has nothing to do with the response that your body made to natural Lyme disease infection. So you would have no problem. In fact, the clinical trial that Pfizer was on did not exclude people with Lyme disease who have had a history of Lyme disease. You should be able to take it. It should do absolutely nothing. It won't reactivate Lyme disease. It won't cause arthritis. A lot of the activists, when we had this McLean vaccine in the early 2000s, they said, "Oh, this vaccine will cause Lyme arthritis." And the fact of the matter is, any vaccine will have, it doesn't matter what vaccine you take, there is some incidence of side effects. Lyme disease vaccine had side effects too, no greater than any other vaccine. But that didn't deter the lawyers. They can make an argument out of everything. The lawyers argued, well, you knew that this vaccine theoretically could cause arthritis. You didn't warn people about it. They filed $1 billion class action lawsuit. The company just said, we're not making any money, we're folding. And there's been no evidence. The CDC has kept surveillance for post-vaccine complications, and there's been nothing out of the ordinary. So that was a perfectly good vaccine. So here I am. I started working on Lyme disease in 1985 as a graduate student. I'm still working on Lyme disease because two things that I did as a young man have been put by the wayside. One was the Lyme disease vaccine, could have saved hundreds of thousands of people from getting Lyme disease. The other was deer reduction. No one's done deer reduction. So you can imagine how I feel as someone who's worked all my life to see my work discarded on the dung heap of history.
Sarah.
I have a question. There are these various co-infections like babiosis. And I'm curious why you think any potential Lyme vaccine might not be able to be a barrier for that. I have a son who has a chronic Lyme condition and has been diagnosed as having a babiosis co-infection. So why wouldn't any potential Lyme vaccine include that kind of protection?
The point about co-infection, and you may have missed it, but Block Island Clinic was where we did the study, the very first study that demonstrated the importance of co-infections of Lyme and babesiosis. So Block Island has a place in history for co-infection. But the point is that having one of those, having both of those is way worse than having just one of them, right? That makes sense.
I have lived that for 10 years or 20 years, yes.
But the Babesia organism is so completely unrelated to the bacteria that immunity with the Lyme disease vaccine will do absolutely nothing for babesiosis, and vice versa, although there's no vaccine candidate for babesiosis. There are good treatments, but not a vaccine. So that means people still have to take precautions. Babesiosis, according to the work that my colleague Peter Krause, who continued the Block Island study up until just before COVID, he would come out here every Groundhog Day and leave people and do a questionnaire survey. The babesiosis is the second most common infection transmitted by deer ticks everywhere we look. And so with the Lyme disease vaccine, we expect to see just as many, if not more, cases of babesiosis coming up. And for some people, it's a way more serious disease. For people older than 55, a good fraction, maybe 20%, need to go to the hospital. And there is about a 5 to 7% case fatality rate with babesiosis. So it is serious. Co-infection is serious, but the two organisms don't cancel each other out. They promote each other's pathology. They promote each other's disease. But other than that, they don't require each other for persistence.
So given that, is there research done on that kind of persistent problem, or is that just something that's just sort of outside of...
That's a perfect question, because the National Institutes of Health, Tufts University has more NIH money for Lyme disease and Tick-Borne disease research than any other institution in the country. So we have a huge group of experts on Lyme disease and Tick-Borne disease at Tufts. NIH has recognized this by awarding us a $20 million 5-year grant, which so far has remained to study the basis for persistent Lyme disease. That there is a certain proportion of people who get Lyme disease, get adequately treated, and never feel right for weeks or months or maybe a year afterwards. So that's what you're talking about, is persistent Lyme disease. So we are actively trying to understand this better. And in fact, I'll be talking to people at the Block Island Clinic to maybe help us, or at least for my study. I have an epidemiology study, so I'm looking at risk factors for developing this. Part of my hypothesis is that there are many, many things out there in the environment. There are mosquito-borne viruses. There's one called Jamestown Canyon virus, which is thought of as not terribly important. People get it, they get fever for 2 or 3 days, stiff neck, and then it goes away. My feeling is that this contributes to persistent illness. Now, persistent illness could also be as simple as what we've seen with COVID. That is, there is long COVID, right? Well, it's not unreasonable to think that there's a long Lyme disease. And we are feeding off of the intense research that's happening trying to understand long COVID. That's going to help us with the other parts of this study. The main part of that study, I get a very small amount of what 95% of all those funds goes towards prospectively enrolling. So our goal was, we will enroll 1,000 people with acute Lyme disease, with erythema migrans, rashes, culture from them to prove that they had Lyme disease and follow them over time to see what proportion of them develop long Lyme disease. And then take samples, blood and tissues, and work them up with state-of-the-art genomics and proteomics technology to try to understand What is it about a person that makes them prone to get this persistent illness? So there's hope in that as well. And it was because people who had persistent Lyme disease lobbied Congress to tell NIH, you must spend some money to understand this condition. So we benefited from that. So yeah, that is currently going on, and I hope to be out here maybe on Groundhog Day, continuing what Peter Krause started with us back in the early 90s, and have a community blood draw with a questionnaire, and, you know, looking at risk factors. I mean, simple things like, do you use insecticides? Are you chemically sensitive? Things like that, which may all play a role in causing long Lyme disease.
So that's a follow-on to his question. It sounds as if you might have just answered it. And my question was, for persistent Lyme or long Lyme, are there any treatments that are currently in the pipeline, or is this research really truly nascent?
There are a number of groups that have been working on this, and that's why you know, as with long COVID, the whole idea is to better understand the profound shifts in metabolism that lead to ill health for weeks or months afterwards. If you understand that, then you can tailor new treatments to it. But right now, there's really not much you can do other than trying to stay healthy and positive.
I mean, do you think that some of the skepticism about long-term Lyme is just because it's a small population that suffers and will be expanding? I mean, I had